I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about my other game of the year for 2024. I told you before it was a bit of a three-way tie for me. There were other games like Astrobot that I honestly loved this year that almost could have pushed it to a four-way tie, but for me, my other game of the year is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now, I talked a little bit about my other games of the year. One of them was on this channel, one of them was over on my channel Degenerate J, but with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, this is a game that I have truly enjoyed, that I feel like there's always more to do in. There's always more to experience, there's always more mini games, there's always more fights to be had, more information to be found. And I wanted to talk for a few minutes about why this game connected with me so much this year and what I love about it. Now, when it comes to this game, I'm not going to take the angle of it being better or worse than the original Final Fantasy VII, because as with Remake, it feels more like an additional component to the original, but one that can be enjoyed without the original if you want. I personally think that these games are best enjoyed if you also played the old timeline, but I know people who didn't who still really love these. So we're going to talk about this for a few minutes today, but I do have a question of the day for you, which is, what was your game of the year? Now, this does not just have to be an RPG game, even though that's mainly what I focus on this channel. It could be something else, but I'd be interested to know what it was and why. Now, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a massive game. It's a very wide open world. It has linear story segments, obviously, like any open world game. Even something like Skyrim, it's going to have linear story elements. It's not like you can do anything to progress the story, but something I really love about the game is that it really takes into account things that I think in the original were questions left by people that they didn't know. So one of these things for me that really connected with me is, obviously you have great gameplay, you have a fun world design, you have all of these things, but one thing that I always wondered when playing the classic Final Fantasy VII were things like, what is this monster? Where does this monster come from? Is there any lore around this monster? And games like Dark Souls, I think, and the Soulsborne franchise have done a very good job of answering questions like this in their genre, where they will answer the question, but also leave enough of the story open-ended and open to interpretation that you have countless video essays, countless theories, countless image and message board topics where it's like, well, what about this guy? What did he do? How does this fit in? Oh, well, we know this small piece of lore. Well, what about this? A lot of times in the original game, when you'd come across an enemy or you would come across maybe even a summon materia, it would be like, who were these guys? Like, why was this monster here? What's the point? And it's not that I want like a detailed biography. It's not that I want a whole novel on why a goblin was in this cave or why a dragon was here. But something that I think this game does so well, Rebirth, and I think Remake did a good job too with it, is giving you some of the lore around the world while still leaving so many things open-ended and up to your interpretation. A great example of this is even in the grassland section of the game, outside of Calm. When you're looking around, and you find these intel pieces on Titan, which is one of the deities in that area. He was possibly responsible for forming parts of the land around Calm. That's not really something you know or learn about in the original game that I remember. For the most part, a lot of these characters are just there doing their thing, and if they're not important enough to contribute to the main storyline or a handful of sub-quests or side quests, you don't really learn a ton about them. I think one of the most infamous enemies like this was actually the just insane abomination Hell House from the original Final Fantasy VII in Midgar. You can learn a little bit about in Remake, or even things like the monster that you fight when you open the Nibelheim mansion, the safe, and all of a sudden you're fighting this weird pirate guy, and you're like, what the hell is this? Well, a lot of times this game actually gives you answers for that if you go out of your way to find it, which I think is one of its biggest strengths, is the assess materia and the ability to learn about the world. It really immersed me in the world that you're actually taking part in. But outside of that, I also just thought the gameplay was very well done. When this was announced for a remake, I was very hesitant about it, and I don't know if I posted this video on here, I'll have to look, but on my other channel, I believe back in the year that it came out, it was my game of the year, and I made a whole video talking about that and why I loved it so much, because Remake expanded the story in some ways, went in different directions in other ways, operating almost as a soft sequel to the original timeline, while not ignoring it and not trying to act as a complete replacement to it. Something that I wish more games, when they do remakes, would go for. But the gameplay style, I think, was probably my biggest holdback on being excited for Remake having come out. Now, once Remake came out, and I experienced it for what the gameplay was, I really, really enjoyed it. But for me, I was kind of going into it like, oh, they're Kingdom Heartsifying Final Fantasy. You know, they're just going more real-time combat. I've already got games like Star Ocean and Kingdom Hearts that were published by Square for that combat style. For me, I love the turn-based Final Fantasy stuff. I still miss it. But I think that this game does such a good job of not being mashy, where it's more real-time, obviously, than the original, and you are interacting with it in real time, but you are still like clicking these buttons in a way where you can kind of semi-pause the game to pick moves once your ability gauge is up, where it's a really good middle ground. You know, you can kind of freeze the game and strategize if you want to, but you can also play the game in a way where, oh, I know I can handle this enemy by just doing normal combos and hitting him with a fire materia shot, so I'll do that. And I thought that that was really cool the way they did that in Remake, and that carried over with Rebirth. The reason I don't have as much to say about that is if you played Remake, the combat here, a lot of it's more of the same, it's just a little more refined. One big complaint I saw about Rebirth was just the amount of mini games and side quests, and while I do understand that to an extent because it is such a big game, I thought that these things made the world feel more lived in and more natural. I thought that these things made the world feel more real, and like there was actually something to do around every corner, not just a lot of open, empty areas that there was no point to, and I really did like that about this game. Now, are there things that I preferred about the original? Yes. Like, for example, I really love that classic turn-based combat. I'm not saying I love it way more than this combat, but I do still think for Final Fantasy games, I probably prefer that just because that was the history of the franchise. That's what it always used to be before a certain era, essentially. But that said, I also think certain things as well with RPG elements are done even better here. And then I think as well there are certain things that I preferred in the original, like some of the Chocobo stuff in the original. Certain things in this game are hidden behind minigames that I find obnoxious, like sneak up on the Chocobo or sneak up on Thing X. I don't really find those minigames fun in this game. I prefer the way that some of those things were done in the original Final Fantasy VII. So that's why I say that, you know, it's like when it comes to what did what better, for everything I could point to the original that I preferred, I could point to Rebirth for preferring. And that's actually something I really like, is that it's very respectful of the past. Are there some things I wish were different? Sure. But the characters, the story, the world, the lore, a lot of these things are also brought to life by voice acting and additional information that you never would have gotten in the original, that I think make this such a worthwhile experience for people who love these characters. Overall, I'm very impressed with the game. I'm very excited for part 3. I would personally love if there was even more story after part 3. Not really sure how that would work, but I know that in the original timeline they did stuff like Advent Children. So who knows? I also get the frustration around like, why does it get so much attention and 10, 9, 8, all these other ones, 6, they don't. I do think Square could do a better job with that. Final Fantasy VII is not the only Final Fantasy that mattered, but I do love it because growing up, like I said, this was a game that affected my life a lot. I found this game in high school, and the storytelling of the original connected with me on a level that's hard to explain and put into words in a short video. So if you want to watch a video I made about some of that stuff, I have that on this channel. But regardless, I appreciate you very much. I hope you enjoyed the video. There are ways to support our channel like a Fortnite code. We also do have our own store, cosmobunny.shop, where you can use code DJAY123 for 10% off your first purchase. Coasters, keychains, trays, and more. These are one of a kind, made from recycled paper. We don't print pictures. What we do is we take books that are getting thrown out by local businesses. They're going into landfills. What we do is we take those, we either buy them dirt cheap or we're gifted them before they're thrown in the garbage, and we take those damaged books and turn the parts of them that have survived into something new and transformative for your home, which I hope you appreciate. Have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay shui.